It is so very beautiful from up here. Rebecca was my teacher. She, Rebecca Parker, from that story, along with Rita Nakashima Brock, conducted their research while Rebecca was on sabbatical from her position as the president of Star King School for the Ministry, where I had my seminary education. Their research turned into a wonderfully well-documented and scholarly book called Saving Paradise. In my second year of seminary, our school had one required class, a one-credit course called Watching Over the Love. We were supposed to spend time being attentive to where we saw love in the world, and then have a conversation with Rebecca about it. That conversation proved to be a pivotal turning point in my life. With the intention of looking for signs of love, when I turned my attention that way, I was able to drop a lens of habitual disappointment that I was holding on to, especially within the context of my family of origin. Anybody else have any disappointments with their families of origin? So instead, for this period of time, instead of tapping into what was not there, I began to see little acts of kindness all over the place. My brother changing his work schedule so he could greet me when I arrived at my parents' home in New Jersey. My mother canceling a social engagement so she could spend more time with me. My father chilling a special bottle of champagne for my birthday. All things I failed to notice for years. And a circle of appreciation grew in me like a pebble thrown into a pond. And as these circles widened, I found that I was able to offer more love, and I was able to notice my own acts of kindness that perhaps I hadn't recognized in myself either. Watching over the love began to help me understand paradise here on earth, because it created an openness in my own heart like this. If you began watching over the love, what might you see? I invite you into that practice. A simple practice of looking for where you see love manifest in the world. Now make no mistake of it, paradise is not perfection. The early Christians lived in barbaric times. They were frightened for their lives, they were persecuted, and they were martyred. And yet, they were awakened to a love that both held them and was a part of them. A love within, among, and beyond them. That orange prayer, that glorious opening to the universe, that's what that was speaking to. The experience of those who lived in the actual physical presence of Jesus was so strong that it transcended even his death. And it was as if Jesus was still among them, even centuries later. As if he was still there, because that love that was felt was so strong. That sense of paradise. So what happened? What happened to the earthly embodied paradise of the early Christian church? Rebecca and Rita showed us later on in their work. Again, looking at art, they went to the oldest surviving crucifix, the depiction of Jesus on the cross. And it was carved in 960, almost 1,000 years after Jesus died. And it's found in the Cologne Cathedral in Germany. Throughout the 11th century, They saw more and more depictions of the crucified Jesus, and they got more and more violent and grotesque as the times went on. This shift occurred as the early Christian church increased its imperialistic ambitions, its desire for power and land. During the reign of King Charlemagne, the church and the state were fused in new ways, and the long-term ban against the shedding of blood was repealed, making Christianity a colonizing tool. They shifted the theology to meet their own needs for power and land and control. They transformed the story of Jesus in order to do this. Now, for decades, King Charlemagne had tried to subdue the Saxons in the north because they had merged their own pagan traditions with Christian beliefs. The Saxons were ultimately baptized at sword point to Charlemagne's Latin version of Christianity. A theology of the crucified Christ signified that those who do not follow him properly were somehow to blame for his violent death, and that suffering like Christ became a piece of the Christian equation, venerating victimization as holy so imperialism could prevail. Are you following me in how that story went? When the church got more connected with power, they needed to shift the theology in order to hold their power. But the truth is, I really want to say this, the truth is that suffering does occur in earth, here on earth. It did then, and it always will. It does now. And so having an embodied form of God, a belief in an embodied form of God that also suffered is very important for our own understanding of the way of the world. Paradise is not perfection. It is, instead, an acknowledgement that in the midst of the daily challenges and even horrors of life, an indescribable beauty and mystery also prevails. Awaking to that mystery enables us to love so fully that we are compelled not only to savor the world we are in, but also to save it. In the years following my seminary education, the watching over the love class that began my shift towards more love, that watching over the love class morphed into another required course, one entitled Educating to Counter Oppression. Now that's quite a shift, you might say, from just watching love to an educating to counter oppression. But looking back, I can see the progression of the school's embodied practice from noticing paradise to saving paradise, steeped in love and the recognition of the challenges in this world. This coursework sought to lift up the truth that suffering in any part of creation hurts all of creation. We know that in our hearts, don't we? We know that. Because, my friends, we also know in our hearts that we are all interconnected. Now take a moment, if you will, and find a label in an article of clothing you have on. Do me a favor, just find a label in an article of clothing you're wearing. Give it a try. And if you can't read it, you might want to ask somebody else to read the label. I want you to find out where that article of clothing was made. Every piece of clothing will tell you where it's made. So find out where your article of clothing was made. Ask your neighbor. See if you can read it. Now, when I tested this on my own clothing yesterday, when I checked out my own clothing yesterday, I found my clothing was made in China, Vietnam, and Nicaragua. What other countries do we have represented here in the threads of our cloth? Guatemala, Indonesia, I heard India,
Cambodia.
Italy,
Cambodia. Cambodia.
Bangladesh.
Sri Lanka.
You get the idea? It's pretty amazing. We are wearing the world. We are wearing the world because we are so interconnected, and most of the time we don't even notice it. We forget how the water that comes out of our faucet, how many people it took to make sure that water was clean, and how we just trust that inherently. We forget about the threads that are woven into our lives. Our lives are so intensely interconnected. We need one another, and others need us. And therefore, if any one of us is suffering, all of us suffer in some way. And therefore, the paradise that exists right now needs to be saved as well as savored. Steeped in love, awakened to the paradise that exists right here and now, let us pray for justice, a decent life, and a peaceful world for us all. And in so doing, we honor a central message of our Christian ancestors. May this be our promise and our prayer. Happy Easter, everyone.